The first sign that my life was being quietly rearranged without my consent came on a Monday morning, the kind that looks harmless until you realize later it was the beginning of the end. My name is Claire Whitman. I was 31 years old when my younger brother called me while I was pouring burnt coffee down the sink and trying to convince myself that being late once wouldn't matter. I still had a job then. I still had an apartment. I still believed that loyalty counted for something inside a family. "Can you talk?" he asked. His voice sounded careful, like someone stepping around broken glass. I said yes because I always did. I had been saying yes to my family since I was old enough to understand what the word meant. He didn't waste time. He told me our parents wanted to make a few adjustments before Thanksgiving. He said it like it was a furniture decision, something cosmetic, something reasonable people wouldn't question. I asked what kind of adjustments. There was a pause long enough for me to notice the hum of the refrigerator and the traffic outside my window. Then he said, "They're thinking it might be better if you didn't come this year." I laughed not because it was funny, but because my brain needed a second to catch up. Didn't come where? Thanksgiving. The house. The family dinner that I had hosted twice in my own apartment when our mother said she was too tired to cook. The holiday I had driven 4 hours for every year without complaint, even after my promotion was quietly handed to someone else so I could stay flexible for family. I asked him why. He said they didn't want tension. That word again. Tension. The family's favorite blanket term. It covered everything from uncomfortable truths to deliberate cruelty. "What tension?" I asked. Another pause, longer this time. "They feel like you've been distant," he said. "And Dad thinks it might be healthier to take some space." I stared at the empty mug in my hand. Somewhere in my chest something tightened and didn't loosen. Space. From what? From whom? From the daughter who had moved back home for a year after Mom's surgery. From the sister who had taken on Dad's accounting work when his partner quit suddenly. From the person who always answered the phone. I asked if this was really coming from them or from him. He sighed. Not defensive. Relieved. Like I'd just said the part out loud so he wouldn't have to. "They asked me to tell you," he said. "They thought you'd take it better from me." That was when I understood this wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a delegation. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I said okay and hung up. Because I had learned over years of small dismissals that reacting emotionally only gave them something to use later. I went to work like nothing had happened. I sat through meetings. I answered emails. I smiled at people who had no idea that my place at the family table had just been quietly revoked. 2 days later, my manager asked if I could stop by her office. It was a clean conversation, professional, polite. She thanked me for my contributions and explained that the company was restructuring. My role was being eliminated. Severance paperwork slid across the desk like a peace offering. I nodded. I asked the right questions. I did not cry. When I got back to my car, I sat there longer than necessary, hands on the steering wheel, feeling like the ground beneath me had developed a fault line. I told myself it was coincidence. Families have bad timing. Companies make cuts. Life stacks things sometimes. That belief lasted until Friday. That was when my landlord emailed to ask if I had a moment to talk about options. I assumed it was about the rent increase rumor floating around the building, or the broken heater he kept promising to fix. Instead, he told me someone had contacted him with an offer to pay an additional $600 if he could end my lease early. Not at the end of the month, not with proper notice. Early, fast. I asked who. He hesitated. Then he said my mother's name. I didn't say anything right away. Silence has weight when you let it sit. She said it would help you transition, he added. Like that made it better. That you'd be moving soon anyway. I asked him if he planned to accept it. He said he was considering it. Turnover costs money. Vacancies create opportunity. I thanked him for the transparency and ended the call before my voice could change. I called my mother next. She answered on the second ring, already defensive, already prepared. "It's for your own good," she said before I even finished asking. "You've been stuck. This is a push." A push. Like unemployment and exclusion weren't enough. I asked her why she didn't talk to me first. She said she didn't want to fight. I told her this was a fight. She just chose the side where I wasn't present. She said I was overreacting, that I always made things bigger than they needed to be. I hung up and sat on the edge of my bed staring at the wall, noticing how quiet the apartment sounded when you realized it might not be yours much longer. That night, my brother texted to ask if I was okay. I didn't answer. By Sunday, paperwork was moving, emails, timelines, language that sounded optional but wasn't. I understood then what had taken me years to fully accept. This wasn't about holidays or housing. It wasn't even about money. It was about control. I had outgrown the version of myself that stayed manageable, quiet, grateful, available. And instead of adjusting, they were removing me. I didn't tell anyone what I planned to do next. Not because I was plotting something dramatic, but because I had finally learned that the most important decisions are made in silence. That evening, I found the old folder I had kept out of habit more than intention, the one with documents from my grandmother's estate. The woman who had taught me that love didn't come with conditions. I hadn't opened it in years. I opened it then. And for the first time since Monday morning, I felt something steady return. Not hope, clarity. The folder smelled faintly of dust and old paper, the kind of smell that carries memory whether you want it to or not. I hadn't opened it since the week after my grandmother's funeral, back when grief still felt like something you moved through, instead of something that quietly reshaped you. I sat on the floor with my back against the couch and spread the contents out slowly, like I was afraid they might disappear if I moved too fast. There were copies of the will, correspondence from the estate attorney, property records, notes in my grandmother's handwriting clipped to the inside flap, reminders to herself about appointments, repairs, and names she didn't want to forget. My name appeared more times than I remembered. At the time, I had barely glanced at it. I trusted my parents. I trusted that if something mattered, they would tell me. I told myself it wasn't my place to question arrangements made during a loss that wasn't just mine. That version of me believed silence was a form of respect. Now silence looked different. I read everything carefully, slowly. The legal language didn't scare me the way it once had. It felt clinical, neutral, like a set of rules that existed whether my family acknowledged them or not. The house was listed, not as jointly owned, not as conditional. It was left to me outright. I felt my stomach tighten, not with excitement, but with a dull understanding. My parents had been living there for years, paying utilities, making cosmetic changes, talking about it as if it had always been theirs. And I had let them. I didn't rush to call anyone. I didn't confront them. I didn't text my brother with screenshots and questions. I did what I should have done the first time. I found the attorney's card. His name was Daniel Morris. I remembered him as calm, older, the kind of man who didn't waste words and didn't soften facts for comfort. I waited until the next morning to call, not because I was hesitating, but because I wanted to hear his voice when I wasn't raw. When he answered, I introduced myself. There was a brief pause as he pulled my file, the faint sound of paper moving on his end. "I remember you," he said. "You were very close to your grandmother." I said yes. I told him I had a few questions about the estate. I didn't explain why yet. I didn't need to. He confirmed what I already knew. The house was mine. Had been since the estate closed. There were no clauses, no contingencies, no shared ownership. "Your parents are occupants by your permission," he said. Legally speaking. Legally speaking. Two words that landed harder than any accusation ever had. I asked him what my options were. He didn't rush. He explained timelines, notices, the difference between family arrangements and enforceable rights. He didn't tell me what to do. He just laid out the facts and waited. I told him I needed a few days. After we hung up, my phone buzzed with a message from my landlord. He wanted to meet to discuss early termination terms. I didn't reply. Instead, I packed a small bag. Not because I was leaving yet, but because I wanted to know what it felt like to choose movement instead of waiting. That afternoon, I drove to my parents' house without telling them I was coming. The driveway looked the same. The porch light still flickered the way my grandmother had always meant to fix, but never did. The door opened before I knocked my mother's face already tight with expectation. She invited me in like a guest, not like a daughter. We sat at the kitchen table, the same one I had done homework at, the same one my grandmother used to sort pills and mail. My father joined us, arms crossed, posture already defensive. I didn't mention the lease. I didn't mention Thanksgiving. I asked one question. "Why didn't you tell me the house was in my name?" There it was, clean, direct, impossible to dodge. My mother's eyes flicked to my father. He exhaled slowly, like he'd been waiting for this moment and resented that it arrived on my terms. "It wasn't relevant," he said. That word again, relevant. I asked him how long they planned to live there without telling me. He said they thought it would be easier if I didn't have the burden, that I had my own life, my own career. I reminded him that career had ended on Wednesday. He said he didn't mean it like that. They both talked then. Not at me, but around the truth. About family. About understanding. About how hard it had been for them after my grandmother passed. I listened. I didn't interrupt. When there was a pause, I said I needed to think. My mother reached for my hand. I let her touch me for exactly 3 seconds before gently pulling away. That night, my brother called again. This time, he didn't pretend everything was fine. "They're scared," he said. "You've changed." I asked him what he meant. "You're not accommodating anymore," he said, like it was an observation, not an accusation. I told him that maybe accommodating had been costing me more than I realized. He didn't argue, he just sounded tired. The next morning, my landlord sent a formal notice. He was proceeding with the early termination, 48 hours. I read it once, then I forwarded it to Daniel. His reply came less than an hour later. "We need to talk." I went to his office that afternoon. He reviewed the notice, his expression neutral. "This is aggressive," he said, "but not illegal." He asked if I had somewhere to stay. I said not really. He nodded. Then he asked if I was ready to stop letting people make decisions for me. I didn't answer immediately. Not because I didn't know, but because admitting it felt like crossing a line I couldn't uncross. "I think so," I said. He outlined next steps: not revenge, not confrontation, protection. And for the first time since my brother's call on Monday, I felt like I was standing on something solid again. Not because things were fixed, but because they were finally in motion. The first thing I learned after my lease termination became real was how quickly dignity erodes when time is taken away from you. 48 hours sounds manageable when it's theoretical. It becomes something else entirely when you start measuring your life in boxes you don't own and decisions you didn't consent to. I didn't tell my parents what was happening. I didn't ask my brother for help. Not because I was proud, but because I finally understood that help from them always came with terms I couldn't afford anymore. I packed quietly, not dramatically, not with music or tears, just methodically, like I was preparing evidence instead of belongings. Documents first. Laptop. External hard drive. Medications. The few pieces of jewelry that had actual value, not sentimental weight. Everything else became negotiable. By the second night, my apartment no longer looked like somewhere someone lived. It looked like a place someone had already left. I slept in my clothes on the mattress because the bed frame was already leaning against the wall wrapped in plastic. I didn't set an alarm. I didn't need one. Sleep came in short, shallow intervals, interrupted by thoughts that arrived fully formed and unwelcome. At 6 in the morning, my phone buzzed. It was my landlord. He asked if I would be done by noon. I told him I would. He thanked me for being cooperative, as if that was the defining trait of my week. By the time I loaded the last box into my car, my shoulders burned and my hands were shaking. Not from exhaustion, from the awareness that I had nowhere to drive to next. I chose a grocery store parking lot a few miles away, not because it was safe, but because it was familiar. I sat there with the engine off, windows cracked, trying to decide whether this counted as homelessness or just a bad day. My phone lit up again. My mother. I didn't answer. A few minutes later, a text appeared. "We need to talk. This is getting out of hand." I stared at the screen until it dimmed. Out of hand. As if this were a misunderstanding spiraling instead of a plan unfolding exactly as intended. I drove aimlessly until the gas gauge reminded me that pretending not to care was expensive. I parked behind a library and carried my backpack inside, blending in with students and retirees who had places to return to afterward. I sat near an outlet and plugged in my phone, watching the battery crawl upward. When it reached a number that felt survivable, I checked my bank account again. The number hadn't changed, but my tolerance for it had. That was when the first real crack appeared. A notification from my email, a subject line I didn't recognize. Notice of account review. It was from a bank I hadn't dealt with in years, the same one my father used for his consulting business. I opened it slowly. It referenced my name as a co-signer, a loan balance, terms that sounded familiar in the way bad decisions always do when they come back. I remembered the day my father asked me to sign. I had been 22, fresh out of school, living at home. He said it was a formality, that my credit would help him secure better terms, that it would never touch me. I signed because saying no in that house had always come with consequences. I forwarded the email to Daniel without comment. He called within the hour. "This is important," he said. "Your name is still attached. If there's instability in his finances, this becomes your problem. I told him about the lease, the exclusion, the house, the timing. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "They're not just controlling you emotionally, they're entangling you financially." That sentence rearranged something in my chest. I asked him what I could do. He said we would address it, but first I needed to be safe. Safe, a word I hadn't associated with my family in a long time. That night I slept in my car. I parked under a light, locked the doors, and reclined the seat as far as it would go. The air inside grew stale quickly. Every sound felt too close. Footsteps, engines. A car door slamming somewhere nearby made my heart spike like I'd been caught doing something wrong. I checked my phone compulsively. Missed calls, messages stacking up. My brother, my mother, my father once. I didn't respond. In the morning, my neck hurt and my patience was gone. I drove back toward my old building without thinking. Habit is powerful when everything else feels uncertain. I parked down the street and walked over, telling myself I would grab a few last things I'd left behind. The key didn't work. I tried again, slower, then faster. The lock had been changed. I stood there staring at the door like it belonged to someone else. Like my life had been edited without my approval. My belongings were stacked along the hallway wall. Boxes, trash bags, a lamp with the shade cracked. A box labeled kitchen that had been taped carelessly, one corner already coming loose. Neighbors passed without looking at me. I didn't blame them. I crouched and opened a bag. Clothes, toiletries. Things that should have been private were now communal, exposed, sorted by someone else's urgency. I called my landlord. He explained it calmly. Liability, turnover. He said my items were accessible, so I wasn't being denied access. He said it like that should matter. I loaded what I could back into the car, moving quickly, aware of how vulnerable I looked in that hallway. When the trunk was full, I sat in the driver's seat and let my forehead rest against the steering wheel. I wasn't crying, not yet. I drove back to the grocery store lot and sat there until my hands stopped shaking. When I finally checked my phone, there was a message from my father. "Call me, now." I didn't. Instead, I opened my notes app and wrote one sentence. "They will keep taking until I stop them." I closed the app and stared out the windshield, watching people walk past with carts full of groceries, unaware that my life had been reduced to what fit in a trunk. That afternoon, Daniel emailed me a draft. Not a threat, not an ultimatum. A notice. Clean, formal, correct. I read it twice before responding with 2 words. Proceed. That was the moment everything changed. The notice went out on a Tuesday. Daniel didn't dress it up. He didn't soften the language or add explanations that would invite debate. It was a statement of fact delivered through proper channels, the kind that doesn't ask how anyone feels about it. My parents were formally informed that they were occupying a property they did not own and that a timeline now existed. I didn't tell anyone it had been sent. I didn't announce it. I didn't warn them. I learned from experience that warning only gave people time to rewrite reality. The first call came less than an hour later. My father. I watched the phone vibrate on the passenger seat while I sat in my car outside the same grocery store, my third cup of cheap coffee cooling in the cup holder. I let it ring until it stopped. Then my mother. Then my brother. Then my father again. I turned the phone face down and focused on breathing evenly. In through my nose, out through my mouth. The way I had learned to do when emotions threatened to make decisions for me. By early afternoon, the tone shifted. My brother texted, "What did you do?" No greeting, no concern, just accusation wrapped in confusion. I didn't respond. An hour later, my mother left a voicemail. Her voice was controlled at first, almost gentle. She said they were confused, that there must be a mistake, that they had received something upsetting and wanted to clear it up before things went too far. Then her voice cracked. She said she didn't understand why I was doing this to them. That word again, doing. As if I had reached into their lives and rearranged things without consent. I deleted the voicemail without replying. Late that afternoon, my father sent a message that finally admitted what was happening. "You need to stop this immediately. This is not how family handles disagreements." I read it once, then again. Disagreements? Not eviction, not exclusion, not financial entanglement, a disagreement. I didn't answer. Daniel had warned me this part would be uncomfortable. Not legally, emotionally. People who are used to control don't react well when it's removed. That night I slept in my car again. I parked in a different lot this time, farther from the road. I cracked the windows just enough to let air in and wrapped my jacket around myself, staring up at the ceiling until my thoughts slowed. Somewhere around 3 in the morning, my phone buzzed. A message from my sister. I hadn't heard from her since Thanksgiving had been quietly taken away from me. She didn't waste time. What are you trying to prove? I stared at the words, feeling something cold and steady settle in my chest. I typed, then erased. Typed again, erased. Finally, I wrote one sentence. I'm trying to survive. She didn't respond. In the morning, my body felt heavy, like it had absorbed the weight of the last week and decided to carry it all at once. I drove to a coffee shop near a strip mall, one that didn't mind people lingering as long as they bought something small. I sat near an outlet and plugged in my phone. The barista didn't look twice at me. I was just another woman with a laptop and tired eyes. I opened my email. There was a new message from the bank. Another update. Another reminder that my father's business finances were being reviewed. I forwarded it to Daniel with a note. They're escalating. He replied quickly. So are we. He suggested we meet. I drove to his office, my trunk still packed with the remains of my apartment. Sitting across from him, I felt strangely calm, like the chaos had finally condensed into something manageable. He laid out the situation plainly. The notice would force a response, either compliance or resistance. If my parents tried to contest it, it would expose details they likely wanted to keep quiet. If they complied, it would mean accepting that their authority over me had limits. He also addressed the loan. There's exposure here, he said. If things go bad, you're vulnerable. I told him I knew. He asked if I was prepared for what might come next. What comes next, I asked. Pressure, he said. Negotiation disguised as concern, promises, guilt, possibly retaliation. Retaliation. I thought of the lease, the timing, the quiet coordination. I nodded. That evening, my father showed up where I was staying. Not the grocery store, not the coffee shop. The library parking lot. I recognized his car immediately. He parked too close, too aggressively, like proximity could substitute for authority. I stayed in my car. He knocked on the window. I cracked it just enough to hear him. You don't get to do this, he said. His voice was low, controlled, dangerous in its calm. You don't understand what you're putting at risk. I told him I understood exactly what was at risk. That was the problem. He said I was being manipulated, that Daniel was taking advantage of my stress, that I was making decisions out of spite. I asked him one question. Why did you ask my mother to pay my landlord? His face changed, not shock, calculation. That was for your own good, he said. You were stuck. Stuck. I told him to leave. He didn't right away. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. If you keep pushing this, you're going to lose more than you think, he said. I rolled up the window. He stood there for a moment, staring at his reflection in the glass, then walked back to his car and drove away. My hands were shaking by the time his taillights disappeared. Not from fear, from understanding. They weren't afraid for me. They were afraid of losing control. That night I moved my car again. I didn't want to be found easily. I checked my phone before sleeping. A single new message from Daniel. Be prepared. Tomorrow may force their hand. I stared at the words until my eyes burned. I didn't know yet how far they were willing to go, but I was about to find out. The morning my car disappeared, I learned the difference between inconvenience and sabotage. I had parked overnight behind a 24-hour gym on the edge of town, the kind of place where no one asks questions if you don't draw attention. I woke up stiff and disoriented, my neck aching from the angle I'd slept at, my mouth dry from recycled air and cheap coffee. For a moment, everything felt almost normal. Then I turned the key, and the engine didn't respond, because there was no engine to respond to. The space where my car had been was empty, clean, no broken glass, no skid marks, just an absence that felt deliberate. I stood there longer than I should have, waiting for my brain to catch up. I checked the surrounding rows like I might have misremembered where I parked. I hadn't. Then I saw the sign. Tow enforcement, permit required. Violators will be removed. The number was printed in small black letters, the kind no one notices until it's already too late. When I called, the man who answered sounded bored, like I was interrupting his lunch. Yes, your vehicle was towed early this morning. I asked why. Private property, no overnight parking. I asked where it was. He gave me the address and the fee in one smooth sentence. Release cost plus daily storage. The total was more than I had available. Not by a little, by enough that it might as well have been a locked door. I told him my belongings were inside. He said that wasn't his problem. When the call ended, I stood on the sidewalk with my phone still in my hand, the morning traffic passing like nothing had changed. My car wasn't just transportation. It was shelter. It was storage. It was the last place I had control over. And now it was gone. I called Daniel. He answered immediately. Stay where you are, he said. Don't panic. I laughed once, sharp and humorless. I think panic already happened, I said. He asked for details: location, time, the company name. He told me he'd look into it, but he didn't promise miracles. This may not be random, he said carefully. That sentence landed like ice water. I hung up and started walking because standing still made everything feel worse. I walked until my legs burned, and my thoughts slowed enough to line up. I ended up at the same grocery store I'd been orbiting for days. The automatic doors opened and closed like nothing in the world had shifted. Inside, the smell of bread and detergent felt almost offensive in its normalcy. I bought the cheapest coffee again and sat at the small counter near the front, my back to the wall, my phone plugged into the outlet beneath the table. It felt like claiming territory, even if it was temporary. Messages started coming in. My brother first. Dad says your car got towed. Is that true? I stared at the screen. He hadn't asked if I was okay. He hadn't asked where I was. Just confirmation. I didn't answer. Then my mother. We heard about the car. This has gone too far. Too far. I set the phone face down and focused on the sound of carts rolling past the low murmur of people discussing dinner plans. I counted my breaths in, out. Daniel called back an hour later. The tow company had a reputation: aggressive enforcement, close ties with certain property owners. Nothing illegal on the surface, but the timing was interesting. Did your father know where you were staying? He asked. I thought about the library parking lot, the way my father had found me too easily, the way he had said I didn't understand what I was risking. Yes, I said. There was a pause. I can't prove coordination yet, Daniel said, but I don't like the pattern. I asked him what I was supposed to do. He said the immediate priority was access to my belongings. He would draft a request to the tow company asking them to place a temporary hold on any auction or disposal timeline while we arranged retrieval. It buys time, he said, not solutions. Time was all I had left. That afternoon, the family group chat came alive for the first time in months. Photos appeared. My parents at a restaurant. My sister smiling too brightly. A caption about needing to relax after a stressful week. I stared at the screen, something cold and clear settling in my chest. They were managing the narrative. To them, this wasn't a crisis. It was a misbehaving piece being corrected. I typed one message into the chat. Please stop interfering with my housing and transportation. 3 minutes passed. My sister replied. You're being dramatic. That was it. No denial, no confusion, just dismissal. I screenshot the exchange and sent it to Daniel. His response was short. That helps. By evening, my phone was full of missed calls. My father left a voicemail this time. His voice was controlled, almost gentle. We're trying to help you, he said. But you're making this impossible. If you don't pull back, you're going to force consequences you won't like. I listened once, then I deleted it. I wasn't interested in warnings anymore. That night, I slept on a bench near the grocery store entrance, tucked behind a pillar, where security didn't bother me as long as I stayed quiet. It wasn't comfortable, it wasn't safe, but it was still mine. I stared at the ceiling tiles and thought about all the times I had been told to be patient, understanding, flexible. All the times I had been asked to absorb inconvenience so others could stay comfortable. Around midnight, a new email came in. From Daniel. He had spoken to the tow company's legal department. They agreed to hold the vehicle for 72 hours without additional penalties while ownership and access were addressed. It wasn't charity. It was pressure applied correctly. I exhaled for the first time all day. At the bottom of the email, there was a second note. Your parents contacted my office. They want to discuss options. Options. I stared at the word until it blurred. They weren't offering help because I needed it. They were negotiating because they were losing leverage. I closed my eyes and let that truth settle. For the first time since this started, I wasn't reacting. I was waiting, and that made all the difference. They wanted to meet. Not as a family, not at the house, not even on neutral ground like a restaurant or a cafe. They wanted to meet at Daniel's office. That alone told me everything I needed to know. People don't invite lawyers into conversations unless they've finally realized feelings won't fix what facts have broken. I arrived early. Not because I was eager, but because I needed the quiet beforehand. Daniel's waiting room smelled faintly of coffee and paper, a neutral space that didn't belong to anyone emotionally. I sat with my hands folded in my lap, breathing evenly, reminding myself that I didn't need to explain my pain to justify my boundaries. When my parents walked in, they didn't look like people preparing for war. They looked like people who hadn't slept. My mother's shoulders were tense, her eyes red-rimmed. My father's jaw was set, his expression tight with calculation rather than remorse. My sister followed them a step behind, arms crossed, already irritated by the inconvenience of accountability. Daniel greeted them professionally and ushered us into the conference room. The table was long enough to create space without feeling theatrical. I chose a chair near the end, not directly across from anyone. I didn't want this to feel like a standoff. I wanted it to feel like a process. Daniel opened with facts. He summarized the notice, the property ownership, the timeline. He explained the implications of continued interference with my housing and transportation. His tone never changed, calm, neutral, unemotional. My father interrupted twice. Daniel let him finish both times, then repeated the facts as if nothing had been said. That seemed to unsettle him more than confrontation would have. My mother spoke next. She framed everything as concern, worry, love expressed poorly. She said they never intended for things to go this far. I listened without reacting. When there was a pause, Daniel looked at me. "Claire," he said, "do you want to add anything?" I shook my head. "Not yet." My sister finally spoke, her voice sharp with frustration. "This is insane," she said. "You're blowing up the family over paperwork." Paperwork. I watched her carefully. The way she leaned forward, the way her eyes flicked to Daniel, then back to me like she was still trying to read the room and adjust. Daniel responded before I could. "This paperwork determines who has legal authority," he said, "which matters when boundaries are crossed." That was the first time my sister looked uncertain. My father shifted tactics. He leaned back in his chair and sighed, the sound exaggerated. "What do you want?" he asked me directly. "Money control. An apology." I met his gaze evenly. "I want my name off your business loan," I said. The room went quiet. My mother turned toward him sharply. "What loan?" she asked. He didn't answer her. He was staring at me now, his expression unreadable. Daniel spoke. "Mr. Whitman used his daughter as a co-signer on a loan that remains active," he said, "which exposes her financially. Given recent events, that exposure is no longer acceptable." My mother's face changed. Shock first, then something closer to betrayal. "You said that was handled," she said to my father. He didn't look at her. My sister laughed once, short and disbelieving. "You can't be serious," she said. "That would cripple the business." I kept my voice level. "Then refinance," I said. "Or pay it down, I don't care how, I care that my name is removed." My father said it couldn't be done quickly, that banks didn't move that fast, that I didn't understand how these things worked. Daniel slid a document across the table. "These are your options," he said. "Refinancing, settlement, or full repayment. The timeline is reasonable." Reasonable. That word hung in the air like a dare. My father looked at the paper but didn't touch it. "And if we don't?" he asked. Daniel didn't hesitate. "Then we proceed," he said, "with all available remedies. No threats, just inevitability." My mother reached for my hand under the table. I didn't pull away this time, but I didn't squeeze back either. "This is too much," she said softly. "We raised you." I looked at her then, really looked. "You raised me to be responsible," I said. "This is me being responsible." The meeting ended without resolution. No yelling, no tears, just a clear shift in the balance of power. Outside, my sister cornered me in the hallway. "You're going to regret this," she said. "They're not going to forgive you." I met her eyes. "I'm not asking them to," I said. That night, I slept in my car again, but something had changed. My thoughts were quieter, less frantic. Like my nervous system had finally accepted that fighting back didn't mean I was wrong. The next morning, Daniel emailed. "Your father's partner reached out. He wants to talk." I stared at the screen for a long moment. This wasn't over. It was just entering a different phase. The call from my father's business partner came just after 9 in the morning. His name was Richard Hale. I had met him twice in passing, both times at holiday gatherings, where he spoke warmly about teamwork and loyalty while avoiding any real conversation. He had the kind of voice that sounded reasonable even when it wasn't. He asked if we could meet to talk things through. I told him I would agree to a public place. We settled on a small diner near a shopping center, the kind with cracked vinyl booths and coffee that never tasted fresh. It was busy enough to discourage theatrics, quiet enough for conversation. Cameras over the register, people in and out. Daniel approved. Richard arrived early. He stood when I approached, offering a handshake I didn't take. He recovered quickly, gesturing for me to sit. He didn't start with accusations. He started with context. He talked about the business, the contracts, the employees who depended on stability. He talked about how sudden changes could ripple outward and affect people who had nothing to do with family conflict. I listened. I stirred my coffee even though I didn't plan to drink it. When he finished, I asked one question. Did you know my parents paid my landlord to end my lease early? He blinked. Once, then nodded. I was aware, he said. But that's separate from the business. I leaned back slightly. My name on that loan was business, I said, when it helped him. Richard exhaled through his nose, a small sign of irritation he probably didn't realize he'd shown. He said my demands would create a crisis, that banks don't like instability, that clients get nervous, that timing mattered. I asked him if timing had mattered when I lost my job, when I was excluded from my family, when my car was towed. He didn't answer that. Instead, he asked what it would take for me to pause proceedings. Pause, not stop, just pause. I told him exactly what it would take. A clean removal of my name from the loan. In writing, enforceable. He said the full amount was unrealistic. I shrugged. That's not my problem, I said. He tried another angle. He said my father had made mistakes but didn't deserve to lose everything over them. He said family disputes shouldn't destroy livelihoods. I thought about the nights I'd slept in my car, the way my mother had framed cruelty as motivation, the way my sister had laughed when my housing disappeared. I'm not destroying anything, I said. I'm stepping out of the blast radius. Richard finished his coffee in silence. When he stood to leave, he looked tired. I'll see what can be done, he said. I didn't thank him. On the way back to my car, my phone buzzed. A message from my sister. Mom says you met with Richard. What are you trying to do? I didn't answer. That afternoon, my mother left a long voicemail. Her tone was soft, careful. She apologized without actually naming anything specific. She said they were scared, that they never imagined things would escalate this far. She offered a deal. If I withdrew the notice, they would help me get back on my feet. Stay at the house temporarily. Help with job connections, support me until I stabilized. It sounded generous until you listened closely. It required me to give up leverage first. I forwarded the voicemail to Daniel. His response was immediate. Do not agree to anything off the record. That night I slept better than I had in days. The next morning the offer came in writing, $30,000. A settlement to release my portion of the cosigner obligation and remove my name from the loan going forward. Immediate payment, no future liability. I read it 3 times. It wasn't the full amount. It wasn't justice in a cinematic sense. It was reality. Daniel called to walk me through the terms. He didn't pressure me either way. He explained what accepting would mean, what declining could risk. I asked him if this was clean. It's enforceable, he said, and it ends your exposure. I accepted. When the money hit my account, I didn't feel triumph. I felt relief, the kind that loosens your shoulders without asking permission. The first thing I did was go to the impound lot. I paid the fees. I retrieved my car. I opened the trunk and touched my things like they were proof that I hadn't imagined the last 2 weeks. Then I did something else. I froze my credit. All 3 bureaus, no exceptions. That evening, my father called again. I didn't answer. He texted instead. We can still fix this. I stared at the words. Fix. Like something broken could go back to what it was. I didn't respond. That night, Daniel emailed one final update. Your parents have until the end of the month to vacate. I sat in my car and watched the sun dip behind the buildings, the sky changing colors without asking anyone's permission. For the first time since this began, I wasn't bracing for impact. I was preparing for quiet. The house was quieter than I remembered the first time I went back alone. Not empty yet, not mine in the way ownership is supposed to feel, but quieter in the sense that tension had started packing itself into boxes, even if the people responsible hadn't admitted it out loud. I didn't announce my arrival. I used my key, the same key I'd had for years, the one I'd never thought of as leverage until I needed it to be. My mother was in the kitchen. She looked up when she heard the door, her expression flickering through surprised caution and something that almost looked like grief. You didn't tell us you were coming, she said. I didn't need to, I replied. We stood there for a moment, the air thick with words neither of us wanted to start. She gestured toward the table, offering coffee like muscle memory had taken over where intention failed. I declined. My father wasn't home. His absence felt deliberate. Boxes lined the hallway, some labeled, some not. The house looked smaller with its certainty gone. My mother followed me into the living room, wringing her hands in a way that might have been nervousness, or might have been performance. It was hard to tell anymore. Your sister's very upset, she said. I nodded. I'm sure she is, she sighed. This didn't have to be so hard. I turned then, slowly, fully. It did, I said, because no one stopped when I asked quietly. Her eyes filled, but no tears fell. She asked where I'd been staying. I told her I was managing. She didn't ask how. I walked through the house room by room. Not to inspect, but to remind myself that memory and ownership aren't the same thing. The guest room where I'd slept during college breaks. The den where my grandmother's chair still sat by the window, worn in the same spot from years of afternoon sun. I stopped there longer than I meant to. My grandmother had known. I realized that now. She had known exactly who would treat kindness like obligation and who would mistake access for entitlement. That evening, my sister arrived. She didn't say hello. She launched straight into accusation. "You've humiliated them," she said. "Do you have any idea what people are saying?" I looked at her calmly. "About what?" I asked. "That they're being forced out," she said. "That you turned on your own family." I waited for her to finish. "They turned on me first," I said. "I just stopped absorbing it." She scoffed. "You always think you're the victim." I thought about the lease, the lock, the tow truck, the nights in my car. "I think I'm someone who learned," I said. She stared at me like she didn't recognize the language anymore. My father came home late that night. He didn't speak to me. He moved around the house stiffly, packing in silence, refusing to acknowledge that the rules had changed. That was his way of coping, pretend authority until it no longer worked. Over the next week, the house emptied, not dramatically, not with shouting or slammed doors, just the steady removal of things. Lamps, books, dishes. The life they had assumed was permanent. I changed the locks the morning after the last box left, not out of spite, out of necessity. I installed cameras, forwarded mail, documented everything. Daniel called to confirm the transfer of utilities. "Clean break," he said. I thanked him. The job offer came the following Tuesday. Not perfect, not glamorous, but stable. I accepted without hesitation. That night alone in the house for the first time, I sat on the floor with my back against the wall and let the quiet settle. It wasn't peaceful yet, but it was honest. I checked my phone. A message from my mother. "I hope one day you understand what you've done." I typed a response. Then I deleted it. Some conversations don't move forward. They just repeat until someone stops participating. I put the phone face down and turned off the lights. Outside, the porch light flickered the same way it always had. Inside, for the first time, nothing was asking me to bend. The first holiday came sooner than I expected. Thanksgiving arrived quietly without announcements or negotiations. No group texts about menu planning. No passive reminders about arrival times. Just a date on the calendar that no longer belonged to anyone else's expectations. I woke up that morning in the house that was finally mine. The sunlight slipping through the curtains in the den, dust floating lazily in the air like it had nowhere else to be. I made coffee and drank it standing up, listening to the quiet. No tension humming under the surface. No emotional weather to anticipate. It felt unfamiliar, not lonely, just unclaimed. Around 10 in the morning, my phone buzzed. A message from my brother. "Happy Thanksgiving." I stared at it longer than necessary. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because I was finally free to decide whether saying anything mattered. I replied with 2 words. "You too." That was all. An hour later, my sister posted photos online. A table set in a rented dining room. Smiling faces angled carefully toward the camera. Captions about gratitude and togetherness. I scrolled once, then closed the app. I cooked for myself that afternoon. Nothing elaborate. A small turkey breast. Vegetables. A pie I'd bought the day before because I didn't feel like proving anything to anyone. While it roasted, I unpacked the last box from my car. It held the things I had put aside when weight mattered more than sentiment. Books, photo albums, a sweater my grandmother had knitted that no one else ever liked but me. I folded it carefully and placed it in a drawer. In the early evening, my mother called. I let it ring. She left a voicemail. Her voice was softer than it had been in weeks, tired. She said the holiday felt strange, that the apartment they'd moved into didn't feel like home yet, that she missed me. She didn't apologize. She didn't ask how I was. She just said she hoped I was okay. I listened once, then I archived it. Not out of cruelty, out of clarity. Later that night, I sat in the den with my grandmother's old chair pulled closer to the window. Outside, neighbors passed with leftovers and laughter, their lives intersecting briefly with mine before moving on. I thought about everything that had changed in less than a month. The job, the house, the loan, the quiet, and the things that hadn't. My sister still believed harm didn't count if it was justified as help. My father still framed control as responsibility. My mother still confused love with protection that only moved one way. They hadn't transformed. I had. A few days later, my brother asked if we could meet. I chose a coffee shop near his office, public, neutral. He arrived looking older than I remembered. tired in a way that suggested he'd been holding more than he admitted. He didn't start with accusations, he started with honesty. They didn't expect you to push back, he said. I know, I replied. He asked if I hated them. I thought about it carefully. No, I said, but I don't trust them. He nodded slowly. He said they were struggling, financially, emotionally, that my father's business was still unstable, that my sister was angry and looking for someone to blame. I listened. I didn't offer solutions. When he finished, he asked if there was any way forward. I told him there was, but it wouldn't look like before. Boundaries aren't punishments, I said, they're conditions. He sat with that. As we stood to leave, he asked if I would ever invite them back into the house. Maybe, I said, but not as owners of my choices. That night I wrote out a list, not of grievances, of standards, what I would accept, what I wouldn't negotiate, what silence meant now. It wasn't dramatic, it was practical, and it felt like something I could live with. December changed the pace of everything. The city slowed in the way it always does toward the end of the year. Lights going up, schedules, loosening people, preparing for gatherings that felt optional instead of mandatory. For the first time in my adult life, the holidays didn't feel like an exam I had to pass. Work settled into a rhythm. I learned names. I learned systems. I learned which meetings mattered and which ones existed just to reassure management. It wasn't the job I'd imagined for myself years ago, but it paid consistently, and no one there asked me to be smaller to make things easier. One afternoon, a package appeared on my porch. No return address. Inside was a photo album, the kind with thick pages and plastic overlays, the one my mother had put together years ago with labeled holidays and careful handwriting. Tucked inside the front cover was a note. I thought you should have this. No apology, no explanation. I sat on the floor and flipped through it slowly. Photos of me at different ages, birthdays, graduations, moments that looked warm from the outside, even when I remembered how complicated they felt on the inside. I didn't cry. I closed the album and placed it on a shelf in the den. It belonged to my history, not my present. A week later, my sister tried again. She showed up unannounced. I was in the kitchen unpacking groceries when the doorbell rang. I checked the camera before answering. She stood on the porch, arms folded, posture already rigid. I didn't open the door right away. I spoke through it. What do you want? She rolled her eyes, the familiar gesture triggering something reflexive in me that didn't get to finish forming. We need to talk, she said. I told her this wasn't a good time. She said it never was anymore. I opened the door just enough to be heard, not enough to be crowded. She accused me of tearing the family apart, of choosing money over blood, of humiliating our parents when they were already struggling. I let her speak until she ran out of steam. Then I said one sentence. You paid my landlord to make me homeless. Her mouth opened, then closed. That's not what happened, she said. It is, I replied. Intent doesn't change impact. She said she was trying to motivate me, that I'd been drifting, that someone had to push. I looked at her calmly. You pushed, I said, and I fell. Then you laughed. Her face flushed. That's not fair, she said. Fair isn't the standard, I said. Safety is. She stood there for a long moment, eyes searching for something in my face that wasn't there anymore. When she realized it, her tone changed. What do you want from us, she asked. I told her the truth. Distance, I said, and respect for it. She left without saying goodbye. Christmas came and went quietly. I didn't decorate. I didn't attend parties out of obligation. I chose what felt steady and declined what didn't. On New Year's Eve, my phone buzzed just before midnight. A message from my father. We did our best. I stared at it, while the countdown started somewhere in the neighborhood, voices drifting through the cold air. I didn't reply. When the new year arrived, I turned off my phone and sat in the quiet, feeling the weight of the past months finally settle into something manageable. Not healed, integrated. The revenge wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic. It was structural. I had removed myself from systems that benefited from my compliance and called it love. And in doing so, I had given myself something they never intended to offer. Choice. January brought clarity in a way December never could. The distractions fell away. The forced cheer ended. What remained were patterns, habits, the quiet truth of who showed up when there was nothing to celebrate. I started therapy again, not because I was unraveling, but because I wanted language for what I had lived through. The therapist didn't call my family abusive. She didn't need to. She asked questions that let me hear my own answers clearly. When did you first learn that saying no came with consequences? Who benefited from your silence? What would safety look like if it didn't require sacrifice? I left those sessions lighter not because the past had changed, but because it had finally been named. Mid-month, a letter arrived from the bank. Confirmation that my name had been fully removed from the loan. No residual liability. No future exposure. I read it twice, then once more slower. This was the part of revenge no one glamorizes. The paperwork, the confirmation, the absence of threat. I framed the letter and put it in a drawer. Not as a trophy, as a reminder. My brother called that weekend. He said things were tense, that our parents were struggling to adjust, that my sister was talking about moving out of state. I listened without comment. Then he asked something I hadn't expected. Do you think we were raised to believe love meant control? I thought about it carefully. Yes, I said, and responsibility without consent. He was quiet for a long moment. I don't want that for my kids, he said. I told him I hoped he broke the pattern. We met for coffee a week later, just the two of us. No agendas, no triangulation. It felt tentative, honest, like something new instead of a patch on something broken. At work, my supervisor pulled me aside after a meeting. She told me I had a steady presence, that I handled pressure well, that there might be room for growth in the coming months. I thanked her and returned to my desk without letting it inflate me. Stability felt better than validation. Late one night, my mother sent a message. I miss you. I didn't respond right away. I thought about what missing meant when it wasn't accompanied by accountability. The next day I replied, I'm open to contact that respects my boundaries. She read it, didn't respond. That was information. The house slowly began to feel like mine in ways ownership couldn't manufacture. I moved furniture, repainted a room, replaced the flickering porch light my grandmother had never gotten around to fixing. Small changes, intentional ones. One evening, as I locked the door and checked the cameras, I realized something had shifted. I wasn't waiting for the next move anymore. The fear that had kept me hypervigilant began to loosen its grip. My family still existed, but they no longer occupied my nervous system. The revenge wasn't in what they lost. It was in what I refused to carry back. By the time spring arrived, the story had already ended. What remained was the living. The trees along the street bloomed without consulting anyone. Neighbors planted flowers. People moved on the way they always do when the crisis belongs to someone else. And for the first time, that didn't feel like abandonment. It felt like permission. I hosted a small dinner in the house one Friday evening. Nothing symbolic, nothing performative, just a few people from work, a friend I'd reconnected with after years of polite distance, and my brother who came alone and left early. The conversation stayed light. The laughter was unforced. When everyone left, the quiet that followed didn't feel heavy. It felt earned. I no longer jumped when my phone buzzed. I no longer rehearsed explanations for decisions that didn't require approval. The part of me that used to scan for danger had begun to rest. My parents tried once more. It came in the form of a letter. Handwritten. Careful. It talked about misunderstandings, about intentions, about how families endure when people choose forgiveness over pride. I read it once. Then I folded it and placed it in the same drawer as the bank letter. Some things don't need a response to be complete. The last thing I did before fully closing that chapter was something small and quiet. I updated my emergency documents, changed beneficiaries, made sure my name only appeared where it belonged. I did it not out of fear but out of respect for the person I had become. Here's what I learned and what I wish someone had told me earlier. People will call you selfish when you stop being convenient. They will say you've changed when what they mean is you've stopped complying. They will frame their comfort as your responsibility and their disappointment as your failure. It isn't. Love without respect is control wearing a softer name. Family without accountability is just a system that rewards the loudest or the most entitled voice. You are allowed to step out of it. If you're listening to this and something feels familiar, pay attention. Know what's in your name. Read what you sign. Keep copies. Build a small safety net if you can, because stability is easier to protect than it is to rebuild. And if you reach a point where keeping the peace costs you your dignity, choose dignity. The people who benefit from your silence will call that revenge. Let them. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever had to choose yourself when the people closest to you made that choice impossible, leave a comment. Share what helped you hold your ground. And if you want more stories like this told honestly and without apology, subscribe. Some lessons aren't gentle, but they are freeing.